Welcome to my 9th video of my school, and we're still mostly looking at the philosophies of the extraterrestrials. So far, a lot of it, not all of it, but a fair amount has been more or less from the Greys, various Grey types, and they see the Creator as being more of a spatial force. They explain in these kinds of diagrams how the spatial creates things. All right. The creation by sort of like a Big Bang, but at an infinitesimal state, or a big contraction first and then the Big Bang. All right, so this is probably going to be just part one because there's a lot to go through. And in the blue there, I've been channeling some new stuff just within the past couple days about how to explain spatial intelligence. The spatial isn't really intelligent. It's kind of something I had to struggle with, but apparently it is, according to their philosophies, the spatial that created the brains of all and most living creatures on the earth, and through different synapses and neuron paths and so forth. So I don't know, I guess I'm going to try to explain all this first with another diagram here. Let's go here. So as an example, these are all examples of the spaces that exist in between the atoms, the molecules, and all other material, matter, energy. All right, these are the spaces. We just, for allegorical means, we're just I'm putting little lines here as the physical. In between the physical is the spaces. This is the spatial in between the physical matter expressions, which could be called dark matter, dark energy. And this is after a certain amount of time, and I'll show you that in a minute, throughout space, through a certain amount of space, there's an accumulation, an amass of density of spatial forces. The spaces accumulate and at some form create things like gravity, light, electromagnetic energy, and so forth, matter and energy. Now here's another more of an example. Here the waves accumulate, the spaces in between matter accumulate. Oops, sorry for the glare there. And they begin to curve, almost like, this is all allegory, begins to curve. And as it curves, it begins to make a form of mass, a form of weight within itself. It becomes stronger and stronger dark matter, dark energy, till it eventually starts to create atoms and molecules and whatnot. And this is measurement in billions of light years. So you have zillions within Googles of spaces in between the physical matter. And so everything becomes kind of like ziplocked, where the nucleus at the center of the atom and the nucleus on the outer part of the atom, there is a big space between them, and that is a form of vacuum sealment, which gives the atom its energy. All right, so again, at a certain point here in time and space, like allegorical of billions of light years worth of matter, the infinity confines itself spatially. So the spatial forces start to create things like atoms and molecules, and all of those originate out of the spatial forces. These lines can kind of be seen as more or less non-yet existent in the creation process. It's just a buildup of space, and still working on trying to explain some of these concepts, which are alien, because decades later, I'm still trying to figure some of this out. But it's something like this. I was showing this the other night. It's like a virus. I was reminded of this because the virus, I was thinking of this and channeling it a long time ago, was a single virus on its own is simply nothing. It's not an organism. It's just an ordinary form of matter. Doesn't have a brain or consciousness or anything that we know of. But as it swarms into the trillions of viruses, it becomes like a brain. It becomes like an organism. And in this collective organism, as people, this happens all the time, as people start to get their vaccinations, the virus swarm starts to mutate. It starts to mutate into in direct response to the vaccinations that are beginning to happen. As with COVID-19, as the vaccinations began, the mutations began in earnest. And so this collectivity, like space, is really nothing on its own. But once you start to collectively bring the forces together in great masses, as in billions of light years, the space does become intelligent simply by the design of the spaces in between the waves and particles, which in themselves generate the waves and the particles in the first place. All right, so thank God there's a lot more diagrams and illustrations to go to help explain all this. This is another part here of their philosophy. This part here is just more or less, let's see if I can zoom into that. It's more of a grand unifying field theory I channeled, based on the one we are closest to now, concerning subatomic particles of bosons and fermions, what they call slow space and fast space. And this is a gauge here. The boson comes in and the fermion energy goes out as this comes in. So it's a very basic, very simple, non-mathematical expression, kind of based on the discovery of the boson, fermion, grand unifying field theory. But that's separate. Let's get to that later. All right, so we get into this line graph, and it's in the billions of years as we progress forward, upward, and the spaces between the particle waves becomes as a form of molecular entanglement of spatial. The spatial actually becomes almost molecular, and that is what creates the entanglement, is the spatial. All right, and these are the spaces in between the dots that are supposed to be particle waves. And so here we have the A mass of the spatial. On one graph, we could divide energy into ergs and grams. So ergs are going one way in latitude, in allegory, and grams in longitude, of representing we can represent the infinitesimal there. This was the creation in their points of view. It was the vacuum filament paradimensional. It was what I call paraportals. That's what I was told. It was actually paraportal vacuum nodules. Get your head around that one. Actual nodules or knots of vacuum nothingness. How do you explain things like that is very difficult, but it's a lot of what I channeled from them. So then we start to get into the second phases of the A mass of spatial density molecules. Fields are folds of infinity, as we see here again in the early graph. I showed you the lines, which are the particle waves representing that, and the spaces in between. The spaces in between contract and become a form of gravity and twirl in on themselves. So we have spatial contraction. And again, this is a representation. When you see photos of atoms, they're all neatly rowed together like soldiers. And if you look at the spaces in between the atoms and within the atoms, you will begin to notice the vacuum-like seal, the true energy that causes these things to spin, to help for all things to have spin. And all of the spatial forces are within a vortex. We've gone through that. So that's one of the main generators, is that the universe is within a vortex of two curvatures of space and time. So charge is created by the friction of the two curvatures, and we showed that. And it creates endless things like the complexities of DNA up into superstrings. Again, quantum entanglement comes with the multifolding infinity of dark matter as it increases into greater and greater density. The greater the density, of course, there's super suns and superstars. The distance builds dimension with spatial A mass. So the greater the distance, the greater the A mass of spatial forces. And its creative forces are seen with the two curvatures of the universe and the vortex in creating such things as DNA replication, the strands of DNA, the interlocked vacuumed molecules, the mitosis of cells and division into creating human beings. So I think that's good for the moment. Don't want to make this too long. There's another part over here that I need to get into yet again.